you're a beginner hiker and you don't really know what your limits are physically when you're hiking, you need to be really, really careful with the advice that I'm about to give you. Seriously. Okay, so hiking in the rain really fucking sucks. Let's just get that out of the way right up front. It's not fun. It's never fun. I guess there's some people out there that think it's fun, but I call those people psychopaths because I don't understand how the hell you could think hiking in the rain would be fun. And the truth is, not only is hiking in the rain really unfun, is that a word? Not only does it really suck, but it can actually be pretty damn dangerous sometimes as well. These dangers come in the form of slipping because, you know, all the rocks and roots and the trail that you're hiking on gets wet and you just go whoop. I'm sure we've all been there before. It can be pretty damn dangerous sometimes. We good. It can also be dangerous because of hypothermia, and this is something that here in the northeastern United States, here in Vermont, is a real threat when you're hiking in the rain, especially during the spring or the fall, obviously, because the temperatures are colder. Do I need to explain? Now, those of you who watch this channel on a regular basis might remember, well, first of all, you're really awesome, by the way, but you might remember my Northville Placid Trail video. I hope you do, because it was just a couple weeks ago that I posted it. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it. It's a video of my through hike of the Northville Placid Trail in the Adirondacks, which are notoriously rainy and very cold. You'll notice that in the middle part of that video, me and my hiking partner Flossie got absolutely destroyed by rain. Now obviously this wasn't the first time that I had hiked in rain like this, but because that happened so recently and because it honestly really sucked so much, I decided while I was out there that shortly after I got back, I was gonna make a video on how to make hiking in the rain suck as little as possible. Because again, I'm not gonna sit here and promise you that I'm gonna make hiking in the rain fun by just sharing these stupid tips. The goal is to make it suck as little as possible and to obviously keep yourself safe while you're hiking in the rain, especially when it's cold out. All right, so the first tip for hiking in the rain safely is to just stay home. Like, don't do it. It's just gonna suck. I kid. This first tip, it's probably gonna seem really obvious to you, but it's so damn important, especially when it comes to safety and comfort, but really gonna focus on safety here. Ready for this? Ready for this revolutionary idea, this incredible tip? Keep your sleeping bag or your quilt and your clothes dry. Yeah, no shit. But seriously, think about it. Think about how you're going to have a foolproof way of keeping your stuff dry before you leave, before you even check the forecast. This is so important, folks. Don't just throw your stuff in your backpack and just assume that your rain cover is gonna keep it dry. You need to be like so thorough and careful about this. Think about the stuff sacks that you're putting your clothing and your sleeping bag into. Think about where inside of your pack you're putting all of this gear. And if you're about to go out on a trip where you know it's gonna rain and you know it's gonna be cold, for the love of God, that is not the time to test a new system to keep your gear dry. You gotta take this super seriously, because as you're gonna learn in just a second from some of my future tips, a warm, dry sleeping bag and warm, dry clothing is quite literally your lifeline sometimes when you're really soaking wet and when it's cold outside. Now I wish I could stand here and tell you guys that I have some like foolproof solution that works in every single scenario for every single person and every single gear setup. I don't. So to be honest with you, you kind of do have to experiment a little bit with this. Maybe experiment's not the right word. You just have to do your research and you have to find a system that's gonna work for you and your specific gear setup. I can tell you what I do personally. As you might have seen in my previous video, I have this ULA CDT frameless backpack, right? And so basically what I do is I take a trash compactor bag, which is essentially like a slightly heavier duty trash bag. I line the inside of my pack with that. So before I put like any gear inside of my pack at all, I shove that bag in there and then I pack everything inside of that bag that needs to stay dry. So my sleeping quilt, obviously, my down jacket, my sleeping clothes, my extra clothes, extra socks, all that stuff, my electronics. I make sure all that stuff is in the trash compactor bag, and then I probably should have brought this out to show you an example, but I'm too lazy, screw it. I seal, is that a good sealing motion? I seal the bag, I seal the bag up, I twist that I kind of shove it, the top down a little bit, God. And then I put my food bag and whatever else gear I have on top of that. Hey, this is Editing Kyle here. I just want to say that was quite possibly the worst explanation of
anything in the history of YouTube.
I've been using this system for literally years. Like, this is the system I've been using basically since I bought my first ULA CDT backpack all the way in 2014, and I've never once had water leak through the trash compactor bag. In fact, I've said this before, but I actually used one trash compactor bag, like the same exact bag, for the entire Appalachian Trail, which is not recommended, by the way, and wasn't my intention when I started, but it always worked, so I just never needed to get another bag. My shit always stayed dry, and trust me, I hiked through a lot of rain on the AT in 2018. Obviously, there's lots of other systems too. Some people use the external pack covers, which personally I found don't really work that well. But hey, if it works for you, that's cool. I know there's some actual like waterproof backpacks, which I've never used either, but I mean, that sounds like a cool idea. Whatever your system is, make sure you test it, make sure it works, because finding out that your sleeping bag or your jacket or your dry sleeping clothes got wet when it's cold outside is just about the worst possible scenario. All right, so next tip, I gotta give like a little caveat with this one, because these next two tips are kind of not related, but kind of dependent on your abilities, right? So if you're a more advanced hiker, you might be able to do either one of these. If you're a beginner hiker and you don't really know what your limits are physically when you're hiking, you need to be really, really careful with the advice that I'm about to give you. Seriously. So I should probably explain what this tip is then. Tip number 2 for hiking in the rain is that sometimes you just have to keep like going. Like, you just can't stop, because if you stop and you're soaking wet, you're gonna be freezing cold. Now, of course, if you're not completely soaked through yet, this isn't going to apply. And honestly, even if you are soaked, but the temperatures aren't that cold and your body temperature, like you feel like you're not in danger of getting hypothermia or being chilled out or anything like that. If it's not that cold out, then you might not need to worry about this. But yeah, if you're wet and cold, this can be a very dangerous situation. And sometimes, again, I'm trying to be careful with this, but sometimes the best thing to do is literally do not stop. And this isn't rocket science. The reason that you don't want to stop is because while you're moving, your body temperature is going to stay warmer, obviously, and therefore you're not going to get as chilled. I've actually found, and this was especially true on the Northville Placid Trail, the toughest parts of the day when it was like raining, when I was soaking wet and it was cold out, were actually not while I was hiking through it. I mean, that definitely sucked, but the toughest parts of the day were actually when we stopped for lunch, because after a minute or two of just sitting there, even with my rain jacket on, like, you just get cold. Your body's soaking wet, it's cold outside. Like, that's just a recipe for hypothermia. And as a result, me and Flossie basically just resorted to taking one break a day. We were just getting so cold when we stopped, and it was so miserable, and we would usually make it a pretty short break as well. Screw it, I'm just gonna get the miles done, I'm gonna keep my body temperature up, and I'm gonna try to get to the place that I'm camping a little bit earlier, so that way I can spend more time like dry in my tent or in my sleeping bag or whatever. You have to be careful with this. If you are a beginner hiker, if you are someone who does not know their physical limits while they're hiking, I hate to say it, but you need to disregard the piece of advice I just gave, okay? That piece of advice is for people who know their body and know their limits only, because what you don't want to do before you have an understanding of how far you can push yourself, try to just be like, oh, Kyle told me to keep hiking when it's raining and don't stop, and then just wear yourself out completely and, you know, just degrade your physical and mental abilities beyond the point where you can make rational decisions. So please, for the love of God, only take that piece of advice if you know your limits. If you don't know your limits, here's what you're gonna do instead. Tip number 3, and this one also does apply to experienced hikers too, but this is especially important for people who aren't as experienced. Sometimes you just gotta stop hiking. You just gotta suck it up and stop. If you are really, really miserable, or obviously if you are like starting to notice the beginning stages of hypothermia, you're soaking wet, you're cold, then you need to stop. You need to set up your tent or get to some sort of dry shelter. You need to change out of your wet clothes, and then you need to get inside of your sleeping. Actually, you should probably put your dry clothes on first. Then you need to get inside of your sleeping bag or your quilt or whatever and warm yourself up. Calling it early isn't always just like a life or death decision that you have to make. I mean, sometimes it can just be a good decision for your mental stamina, I guess, especially if you're on a longer hike. And so maybe what you need in that specific circumstance is to just stop early, get dry, and kind of recharge yourself mentally, even if you have the physical ability to keep going on that particular day. And now that I've brought up like the mental side of things and mental stamina when it comes to hiking in the rain and all this stuff, that's a good transition into my 4th point, which is you have to try and like really, really try. Like, you gotta be you know, that, whatever that means. Really, really try to not be miserable. Try to have fun with it. Try to have a good attitude about hiking in the rain. And obviously, this is way easier said than done. Hiking in the rain sucks. It's not fun. You can tell that it's not fun. If you go watch my Northville Placid Trail video, you can tell that we were both pretty fucking miserable. However, there's a difference between just being like, oh, this kind of sucks, but like we're trying to make the most of it, and just completely, you know, being defeated mentally. And this is something that happens to a lot of people on thru hikes. Like, try your damn best to go into it just knowing that it's gonna suck, but also remembering that the rain is gonna pass too. And wow, that's so like cheesy. If you don't even like try to fight back against the negative mentality that's gonna hit you when it starts to rain and when things aren't fun, then you don't even stand a chance. Like, you're basically wasting your time out there. In my opinion, that is the #1 piece of advice that I can give for being able to push yourself through when the weather sucks, when it's raining, when you're cold, when you're miserable. That's so important. So with that said, if you want to hear some stuff that's a little bit less miserable than hiking in the rain, you should check out my podcast, Trail Tales, trailtalespod.com. You'll hear some long-form conversations between experienced hikers, a bunch of hiker nerd nonsense like that, which I know you're into if you're watching this video right now. That's gonna do it, folks.